you're out there. You're listening. You're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. I'm not here to tell you how this is going to end. I'm here to tell you how this is going to begin. I'm going to start this broadcast, and when I do, I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. A world without controls and boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. As part of the latest push for gun control in America, we've seen politicians on both the left and the right of the political spectrum openly call to give police the authority to confiscate firearms from people they deem to be mentally ill prior to providing proper due process. And we're going to discuss why that's a big problem. Now, I think we could all agree we don't want people with mental illness running around the streets of America with loaded firearms, potentially shooting up schools, potentially shooting up concerts, nightclubs, whatever it might be. Mentally ill people with firearms is definitely a problem. And I've argued ad nauseum on this channel, and I backed it up with empirical data. And if you haven't watched my report, The Truth About Gun Control, I strongly recommend you watch it. That America does not have a gun problem. America has a problem with mental illness and culture. And nothing makes that more obvious than the case study of Switzerland, a country with the third highest gun ownership rate in the world, a country that hasn't had a mass shooting since 2001, a country that's seen only about 150 gun-related homicides in the last decade. America has a problem with mental illness, not a problem with guns. Now, looking into America's mental illness problem, you see that, and this is a remarkable stat, that 1 in 6 Americans take psychiatric drugs on an annual basis. CBS News, study reveals how many U.S. adults are taking psychiatric drugs. New research estimates about 1 in 6 American adults take at least one psychiatric drug over the course of just 1 year. I think it's pretty clear that America has a problem with psychiatric drug use and big pharmaceutical companies, not with guns. And if you do deep research into the mass shootings, at least the modern mass shootings in the United States of America, you'll find that Omar Mateen, the Pulse nightclub shooter in Orlando, had used psychiatric drugs. Stephen Paddock, the Las Vegas shooter, had used psychiatric drugs. Dylan Roof, the South Carolina church shooter, had used psychiatric drugs. Nicholas Cruz, the Parkland High School shooter, had used psychiatric drugs. James Holmes, the Colorado movie theater shooter who dressed up as the Joker, had used psychiatric drugs. And almost all of these shooters, dating all the way back to Columbine 20 years ago or whatever it was, were on or had taken psychiatric drugs. Yet you won't hear the mainstream media talk about it. Why is that? Big pharmaceutical companies spend millions, billions of dollars on advertisements, commercials, or online advertisements for all of the media, whether that's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, online publications. And these aren't just advertisements. They are payoffs to the mainstream media not to draw attention to big pharmaceutical companies' role in not treating but creating mental illness in the United States of America, and that mental illness's role in creating mass shooters in the United States of America. Another narrative that we see is that politicians won't ban guns because they just receive so much money from the NRA. Yet the NRA doesn't spend nearly as much money on lobbyists or advertisements as big pharmaceutical companies. In fact, no industry spends as much money on lobbyists as the big pharmaceutical companies. The politicians make millions of dollars, the big pharmaceutical companies make billions of dollars, the mainstream media gets their payoff, and the root cause of mental illness in America is not discussed. But with that being said, why can't we give police the authority to just blanketly confiscate weapons from people they deem to be mentally ill? Well, we've already seen government abuse its power. In states that have legalized marijuana, or allow you to have medical marijuana, those states have denied gun permit. They have denied the right to bear arms to people that have been prescribed marijuana by doctors. And if you look at the DSM-5, the diagnostic manual, there's something called oppositional defiant disorder. Let's take a look at what that is.
What is oppositional defiance disorder? Even the most mild-mannered children have occasional outbursts of frustration and disobedience, but a persistent pattern of anger, defiance, and vindictiveness against authority figures could be a sign of oppositional defiant disorder. ODD is a behavioral disorder that results in defiance and anger against authority. It can affect a person's work, school, and social life. ODD affects between 1 and 16% of all school-age children. It's more common in boys than girls. Many children will start to show symptoms of oppositional defiant disorder between the age of 6 and 8 years. ODD occurs in adults as well. Adults with ODD who are not diagnosed as children often go undiagnosed. The symptoms include frequent temper tantrums, refusal to comply with adult requests, excessive arguing with adults and authority figures, always questioning or actively disagreeing or disregarding rules, behavior intended to upset, annoy, or anger others, especially authority figures, blaming others for their own mistakes or misbehaviors, being easily annoyed, vindictiveness. Symptoms in adults: feeling angry at the world, feeling misunderstood, strong dislike for authority, including supervisors at work, identifying as a rebel, defending themselves vehemently and not being open to feedback, blaming others for their own mistakes. And then we scroll down and we get the criteria for diagnosis. A person must have a pattern of anger or irritable moods, argumentative or defiant behaviors, or vindictiveness lasting for at least 6 months. During this time, they need to display at least 4 of the following behaviors from any category: losing their temper, being touchy, being easily annoyed, becoming angry or resentful, argumentative or defiant behavior, having frequent arguments with authority figures or adults, actively defying requests from authority figures, refusing to comply with requests from authority figures, deliberately annoying others, blaming others for misbehavior. So then we scroll down and we see the treatment options, and among those treatment options are family therapy, parent-child interaction therapy, peer groups, and, you guessed it, medications.
There is already a disorder on the books that deems the questioning of authority to be mental illness. And if it couldn't be any worse, this disorder is used to justify the drugging of school children who will not submit to authority. If you want to know how a society falls apart, how a culture deteriorates, look at a society that drugs school children because they're not subservient, because they won't submit to authority. In fact, if you want to know how someone like me winds up doing this, when I was a child, when I was just in elementary school, my mother got called into the principal's office. And the principal and the school psychologist sat down and they said, "He has ADHD, we need to drug him." And my mother basically told them to shove a foot up their ass. Yes, I was a very hyper child, I got in a lot of fights. That's young boys being young boys, but in today's society, that's deemed mental illness. But luckily my mom did not drug me, so I'm not subservient to authority, and because of that, you have the person in front of you that openly questions authority. And for those of you who follow me, you have the person in front of you who thinks freely and is able to objectively interpret information. And speaking of thinking freely and objectively interpreting information in the context of oppositional defiant disorder and the DSM-5 and the government declaring people mentally ill, look at the following study I'm going to show you to demonstrate how the diagnosis or the definition of what is mental illness can easily be expanded by the government.
Connecting the dots. Illusory pattern perception predicts belief in conspiracies and the supernatural. The University of Amsterdam, the University of Kent, the United Kingdom. Abstract. A common assumption is that belief in conspiracy theories and supernatural phenomena are grounded in illusory pattern perception. In the present research, we systematically tested this assumption. The study revealed that such irrational beliefs are related to perceiving patterns in randomly generated coin toss outcomes. In study 2, pattern search instructions exerted an indirect effect on irrational beliefs through pattern perception. Study 3 revealed that perceiving patterns in chaotic but not in structured paintings predicted irrational beliefs. In study 4, we found that agreement with text supporting paranormal phenomena or conspiracy theories predicted pattern perception. In study 5, we manipulated belief in a specific conspiracy theory. This manipulation influenced the extent to which people perceived patterns, which in turn predicted unrelated irrational beliefs. We conclude that illusory pattern perception is a central cognitive mechanism accounting for conspiracy theories and supernatural beliefs. Concluding remarks. It has frequently been noted that both conspiracy and supernatural beliefs are widespread among populations of normal, mentally sane adults. Why are these irrational beliefs so widespread? In the present research, we addressed this question by focusing on the cognitive processes underlying irrational beliefs. The answer that emerges from our data is that irrational beliefs are associated with a distortion of an otherwise normal and functional cognitive process, namely pattern perception. People need to detect existing patterns in order to function well in their physical and social environment. However, this process also leads them to sometimes detect patterns in chaotic or randomly generated stimuli. Whereas the role of illusory pattern perception has frequently been suggested as a core process underlying irrational beliefs, the actual evidence for this assertion, "Here art thou," was unsatisfactory. The present findings offer empirical evidence for the role of illusory pattern perception in irrational beliefs. We conclude that illusory pattern perception is a central cognitive ingredient of beliefs in conspiracy theories and supernatural phenomena.
In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin weaponized mental illness, declaring his political opponents mentally ill and using the diagnosis to throw them in prison. Mental illness was also weaponized against the population in general. Regular citizens who questioned the government were deemed to have mental illness and forced to take drugs or put in prison. They were deemed to be mentally ill because the communist utopia had arrived in the Soviet Union. So anyone who wasn't happy must have been mentally ill. Historically, the diagnosis of mental illness has been weaponized by tyrants to silence political dissent. This is why we cannot give the government, police, the authority to bypass due process in the United States of America. If the government is going to confiscate weapons, it has to come after a jury has given them permission to do so, or after a judge has given the government permission to do so, a judge that is available to the public and could be properly vetted. The definition can be expanded to a point where someone like me could have been forced to take drugs when I was a child. I could have been forced to take ADHD medication, and I would not be the same person you're listening to now. And look at the study I showed you. Are you a conspiracy theorist? If you follow my channel, the government would sure deem you to be a conspiracy theorist. The mainstream media would sure deem you to be a conspiracy theorist. Would they be able to diagnose you with mental illness? Would they be able to force you to take drugs that make you capitulate to authority, subservient to authority? Would they be able to throw you in a prison cell? We have to think about these things when we give away our liberty to the government. Because once you give liberty away, it is so hard to get back. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate you watching my videos. Please share. If you want to support me financially, it goes a long way to empowering me to get out the message of individual liberty, combating government, and exposing very corrupt forces in the world. Go to www.patreon.com/FFRnews. As little as $1 a monthly makes all the difference in the world to me. I'm TomFFRnews on Twitter, TomFFRnews on Minds. I am Tom Anderson on Steemit, Tom Anderson on Gab, Tom Anderson on Facebook, and FFR News on Facebook. I really appreciate your support. Thank you.